All right. Hi, welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. I'm your host, Harmony, and I'm here with Russell Case.
We've had another ad by Harmony. So I have to say the Institute of Integrative Nutrition enroll in IIN's health coach training program and become a health coach in 6 months. That's not very long. Live a life you love.
That's the accelerated program.
That's never good. The next generation of health coaching is here. Licensed school, earn your tuition back, study anywhere, anytime. They've given us $30,000.
Amazing.
Right?
Oh my God.
Yeah. So for those of you listening, that's the going rate for an ad buy. If you have something that you'd like to put on the show at home, I'm speaking to Valerie here, please call in. Sara Intonato, how are you?
Yeah, I'm great. How are you guys?
We're doing wonderful.
Yeah, it's so nice to see you too. It's been so long. We were just chatting. I think 2017 was the last time we were all together in the flesh. We weren't in human form.
Oh, Jesus Christ. We weren't in New York together on tour, right? We weren't in.
Yeah, we might have been. Yes, we were.
Yeah, maybe. We might have brushed shoulders and elbows.
Maybe 2019, maybe?
Yeah. Russell, when you were reading the ad before, I was like, Russell could be a voiceover actor. You really have such a nice voice. I have a friend who's a voiceover actor and she's nominated for a BAFTA this year. And as you were talking, I was like, oh, Russell's voice is legit.
Is that Emma O'Neill? Is that who you're referring to? Because I think she got a Canadian award.
Oh, maybe she did. This is a friend of mine named Jennifer Hale.
Oh,
and she's got a really beautiful voice. She has a lot of female superhero characters.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Really
oh, goodness.
You could do this, Russell.
I started volunteering for a local radio station, and I do I'll do spots for them. And they'll do like African American history or African Canadian history, Black History Month in Canada, and so I did a spot for them, like that. And so they, I try it.
He's on the radio.
I'm frustrated in many different aspects. There's a lot of different things I'd like to be better at.
No.
I have an intro for those of you listening at home who may not have the pleasure of knowing our guest. Mary Stuart Masterson is an actress from Hollywood. She did such films as Some Kind of Wonderful. What else was she in? A lot of Eric Stoltz films, right?
Yeah.
Is that right? It's such a pleasure that you'd be on the show today. I know it's kind of asymmetrical that, we're kind of not that big, but thank you.
You're welcome. I mean, that was one of the best compliments I've received, to say that I look like Mary Stuart Masterson. I'll take it.
No, it's striking. It's a striking resemblance.
Take
actually.
it for sure.
And especially I've never gotten before.
And she was very young in those films as well.
It's
so
true.
Just like,
as it is our guest, Harmony.
At 41 years old, I'll take that.
Mary is a level 2 authorized Ashtanga yoga teacher. She teaches autism families the tools to heal themselves so they can thrive instead of letting stereotypes define them. She gives spirituality, advocacy, and healing to neurodiverse families and children. That's so
I'm so excited
when did you stop
that you're here doing
acting.
Stop it. I'm so excited that you're here.
A lot.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be
Speaking of
here.
neurodiverse.
Right.
Your host, Russell Case. Intonato, it says, actually. It means in tune in Italian. That's so amazing. Were you a music student? Were you naturally drawn to Harmony when you met her?
No, well, I was naturally drawn to Harmony because she's Harmony. But
right, and then I
can't take credit for that last name. It's my husband's family's last name.
Oh.
I think it's from the Sicilian side of his family, and I think his great-great-grandfather was a singer.
Oh my goodness, that's so cool.
And I
like
think
a stage
that
name.
At some point, and at some point in the transition to America, that I don't know if it was the last name before that or if it became that, but in tune.
That's so cool.
And are you like a what do they call a Jap? Are you one of those?
What?
You're not Jewish? I assume she
I'm
was
not.
Jewish. You look
No.
really.
You
because I
think
live in Ireland?
everyone's Jewish?
She's an obvious shiksa. Or
He
then
thinks
I mean an
everyone's
anti
Jewish.
shiksa's not. Sorry, shiksa's not Jewish at all. That's a
No, Shiksa's not Jewish. Come on,
shiksa's
Russell.
a wasp who marries a Jewish man.
I live in Long Island. I probably know more of these Yiddish words than you, but
Exactly.
I'm not Jewish. I've learned a lot of them from my students over the years, and
Oh my
I love
goodness.
them.
No.
Somehow when you say a Yiddish word, you know what it means, even if you don't know what it means.
Yeah,
It's
like a
really
shamil. Like it's so obvious what shamil is.
That's a Yiddish word.
You're a host,
no.
Russell Case, is shamil.
I am a Boston native, actually, and my
Like a native,
parents,
like First Nation.
I grew up in Boston. I was
Born and raised.
First Nation, Boston,
Born and raised in
Appomattox.
Boston. And my parents grew up there too, but my mom's family came from Italy, and my grandmother. Yeah.
You're the whitest girl I've ever seen, though. But like, come on.
My dad's family is Scottish, and they came through Nova Scotia, America.
Oh.
So hence the blonde.
New Scotland is Nova Scotia in French.
So there we have it.
Scottish Italian.
I'm a mutt. Yeah, I'm Scottish Italian.
I think we all are over here.
We all are, right?
Mutts are very expensive nowadays. Like a Labradoodle, very expensive mutt. Surprisingly expensive is what I discovered when we overpaid for ours.
How old is your dog? Still a puppy.
5.5 months.
Oh, puppy, yeah.
Yeah, way too much money for what we got from her.
So cute.
Well, we are getting a service dog that's a golden doodle for my son. He'll be here in a few weeks. We've been waiting for 1.5 years for him, and he's a full-size golden doodle. So he's a big boy. He's going to be close to 100 pounds.
Yeah.
And he arrives at the end of this month ready to help my son Rocco, who has ASD, autism spectrum disorder, be more independent. And we're so excited because the only way I could sell my husband on a dog was having it arrive fully trained. And ready to help.
He's
ready to help. I love it.
Wow.
Yeah, ready to help. So that's how we got the pet in the house. But it's just as much, almost like a working dog as a pet. He'll probably go to school with Rocco too.
Oh wow.
Yeah, he has a lot of really interesting skills that I'm excited to see in action.
How old will he be when he comes to your house?
About 15 or 16 months.
Okay.
So
yeah.
He was raised by someone who helped him with the basic training, and then he went to advanced training for a few months at least for skills that are more tailored to my son's needs. My son is classified as nonverbal. I don't really subscribe to that label because he tries his damnedest to communicate with words every day.
Oh,
his
wow.
words don't sound like they're properly formed because he has a second diagnosis of apraxia. So it's almost like when the little child is learning to speak, their parent knows what they're saying, but maybe someone on the street doesn't know what they're saying. And so some of his words sound a lot like that. So we're very excited to have another support for him to help him be more and more independent.
Could you define apraxia for us?
Yes, it's a motor planning issue relating to speech. So his brain knows exactly what it wants to say. I could say, hey, Rock, how was your day? And his brain would say, oh, it was good. In math, I did this. In science, I did this. But when he goes to say it, the motor planning channels between brain and musculature are, I guess the word would be disrupted. So he in his head knows what he wants to say and can't always express it. So we have a lot of different tools that help him do so, but that's what apraxia is. And I was explaining this to Tim Feldman once. We shared a taxi to the airport in India, and Tim and I know each other very well. And I said exactly what I just told you, what apraxia is. And Tim goes, I know exactly what this is. It's like when my brain is telling my body to do kapatasana, and my body's like, what? No, I can't do that. And I was like, basically, it's the same idea.
I feel the same about music. Like I can hear the melody in my head perfectly, and I can sing it, and then I go to sing it, and it sounds like a completely different song.
Well, motor planning is a real thing. And there's a lot of evidence that people with different types of special needs, neurodiversities, diagnoses, have motor planning neuropathways that move slower. And so it's not that they're incapable of doing the same things that you and I do, it's that they might need more supports to build out that process. It might take them more time, more repetition. And this is actually a really good thing that we're discovering, because many people wrongly assume that someone who is considered nonverbal or limited verbal ability isn't as smart, which is completely untrue. And so it's really exciting to see that now, as more and more research comes out that supports this population, hopefully more opportunities will be available for them too.
Yeah.
I want to ask another question, because it just occurred to me that maybe we should define autism as well. I've for the last 15, 20 years or so, I've been started believing that my father is, I think what they used to call Asperger's, but now low spectrum autism. And I'm wondering if there's any way that I could properly diagnose him without his involvement. Because he's difficult to talk to. I mean, he just this morning, he texted me a machine because he wanted to say, you know, how much he loved me. So he sent me a picture of another car. And like, that's all he does. He just sends me pictures of machines. And he really, really struggles. So I'm wondering if you could also maybe define autism for
because
us.
there's like a huge spectrum, like when people say neurodivergent now, it's like very,
what does that mean?
It's huge, right?
It's huge. And the definition of autism, I'll give you the Oxford definition. I just pulled it up. Is a developmental disorder of variable severity. That variable is a key piece there.
Yeah.
That is characterized by difficulty in social interaction and communication, and by restricted or repetitive patterns of thought and behavior. I think that's an accurate definition that can be so varied in terms of how it shows up in someone's life. For example, my son has great challenges with his language. He also loves social interaction. He's an extrovert. He loves big dinner parties, loves to be in a group of people, loves to hold hands, loves affection. So he's very atypical of what people think about when they think of someone with autism being withdrawn and isolating themselves and not wanting to connect. So, and yet, if you tried to communicate with him, you might assume that he had a lot more challenges. But in some ways, he's very easy to navigate life with, because he loves interacting with people. Whereas I've had many clients who have kids who are so smart that they're not given help in school in terms of socializing, how to handle things like a group project can be overwhelming to them. Their social anxiety piece is very intense. They're not confident in how to engage with others. And then when they lack confidence, they engage less and less. And it's kind of like riding a bike. The less you do it, the more out of practice and rusty you get. So the spectrum is very vast. And if you've met one person on the spectrum, you've met one person on the spectrum. Right? It's really challenging in terms of how to support people who come with a label, but as you get to know them, have a lot of uniqueness, even next to someone with the exact same label.
It's interesting. I think I didn't really quite realize how much my dad was struggling until I saw him with other people and in groups. And for so much of my life, I would go to his house and we would, be very kind of weird situation for me, disassociative in its own way, alienating, but like, I'm here with my dad. This is what my dad's like. But then when I saw him in a large group of people, like my first wedding, I realized that his social cues were so wrong and so off. And we'd be having a conversation and we'd probably be having a conversation about, like, say, yoga as a group. And he would break in and he would try and define the word baby mama to us. You know what a baby mama is? And it was like, whoa, that's not what we're talking about, Dad. Okay.
But he had it in his head.
Yeah, and he needed to get it out. Yeah,
Yep.
loop. And it's like, I need to really tell these young people about baby mamas.
He did fine at our wedding.
No, he didn't.
He did.
No. He
Yes.
basically just kind of moved around in like a.
Everyone loved him.
Everyone
He's
loves him, yeah. But he does not know what's going on.
He totally knows. He totally knows.
Think about, I mean, how old is your dad? Is he in his 70s?
Yeah, he's 70. Yeah.
Okay.
72.
So yeah, so think about when he was a kid.
Yeah.
There was no support for
Mhm.
students who learned differently. There was no support for students who interacted differently. I remember when I was a kid, you know, I can go back and think of my 4th grade class and pick out the kids who probably had something going on in the way of
Mhm.
ADHD, or their learning was different. And, you know, they got taken out to the resource room, or they got extra help after school or something like that. But no one was telling them, hey guys, your brain works differently.
Right.
They were instead being kind of pushed to fit into this box
Right.
that this box was not made for them.
Right.
Yeah.
I
And
wonder
so
if you could.
yeah.
I wonder if you could talk about that at all, because I've heard, and I'm not sure if you've seen this, but I've heard that in a very different kind of environment, autism is incredibly useful to human beings to function at a very high level. Say, for example, if you want to follow a herd for 100 miles, like you want someone who's a little autistic to be leading that. Have you heard that kind of thing before?
I have, and I've heard that, you know, and from a spiritual perspective, I have a spiritual teacher who I work with, and he loves to talk about people who are unique, autism, different types of neurodiversity, as more evolved and spiritually and energetically. And so they come to this planet intentionally here to make us see differently and learn differently. And yet so much of the energy spent on this population is trying to fit them into this box that they're just not meant to fit into. That's why many of them are very sensitive to sound, or to crowds, or to external stimuli. It's almost like their vibration is too high to be comfortable amidst the earthly mess. And I do believe that's true. And I think that we have a lot to learn from them. There's actually a documentary being made about my son, Rocco. It's going to be in film festivals really soon.
Oh,
Yeah, and there's a clinical expert who gives an interview in the film, and he's written a book called Blue Mind, which is all around the ocean and how the ocean heals you, because of course we surf. We love the ocean. I have the book right here. It's by
Please.
Wallace Nichols. Wallace Nichols is his name, and he talks about how special needs kids aren't just needs, they have special gifts too. And this is true of special adults as well.
Yeah.
And I think that if we can stop trying to get them to conform to these constructs in society, in school, that were built for different types of people, and instead get more curious around, well, how did they learn? How do their brains work? What types of environments really help them to thrive? I think that certainly in my son's case, I've seen him become very, very astute around his other senses, because language does not come easily for him. So he's very perceptive with energy and sound and listening and all different types of stimuli that most people probably don't pay attention to, because they're just caught up in their stuff all the time.
I think I've heard someone say once that it's autism could also be, or maybe it's unfairly described as the engineering gene. And it's, and so if you have a couple of engineers in the family, you might statistically be more likely to have a child with Asperger's or autism. And maybe I heard that in Silicon Valley, where I think so many people are, really struggling to make social cues, but, are CEOs of a tech company.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely possible. And I think that you do see people who are, as you said, more in the Asperger's classification area have that. What you're talking about with your dad really summed up perfectly, almost like you get in a loop. And this is the thing that you're good at. This is the thing that you're passionate about. This is the thing that really motivates you all the time. There's a very fine line I've learned between having a passion, a loop, and having it become an OCD or a fixation. It's a very fine line that a lot of people with neurodiversity often go back and forth on, depending on how they manage themselves and the supports that they have. But I think that that's absolutely true. And I think it's also something that is probably fostered by the fact that they might relate more to technology or machines than people. And certainly if they haven't been nurtured in how they relate to people, they'll certainly put more awareness into the things that they do relate to easily and feel confident around.
I think I think the first time I really heard about autism was when I was much younger, and my mom was a nurse also. Like, I think your mom was a nurse too,
Yeah.
right? So we watched the movie Rain Man together.
Oh, yeah.
And so then she was explaining to me, like, because you're a kid and you're like, what's wrong with him, and so then she was explaining autism.
But it was clearly like what was great about him.
Yeah, but he had like these incredible gifts, right? It's such a beautiful movie because it does show, I think, in a really emotional way also, like,
Totally.
sort of that love and that the ability, like these incredible gifts, but then also like still loving or wanting to have social connection, but also having something that is preventing that from happening, right?
Yeah, it's true. And I remember recently, it was, winter break or something, and I took my kids and like 4 of their friends bowling. So I threw them in our pickup truck and we went to the bowling alley. It was like snowing and terrible weather outside. And so my daughter had a bunch of her friends. So there's like the little like girl volume that happens, like the pitch and the volume and the frequency that little girls have when they're together, like 10-year-old girls. Like, it was loud, it was frenetic. And my Rocco was just sitting in the back, like as happy as can be, totally cool.
Totally unaffected.
Totally fine with it. And then, it was funny. We had our bowling day. He was great. I joked, but was also kind of serious with my husband. I was like, he is the easiest kid of all of them. No question about it. And then I came home and then drove the other girls home. And when he came back, he's like, all these neurotypical kids are nothing like my special pure Rocco. And I said, you're right. Like he's got a purity to him that is really beautiful. And I think a lot of people who are special needs, unique, whatever title you want to use, there's something about that I think we can all learn from and appreciate. I see kids his age, he's 12, kind of getting into their like bratty preteen phase. Yeah. And he's just not like that. He doesn't care about that stuff. He has his moments like anyone else where he throws his clothes on the floor and doesn't want to pick them up, but that's age appropriate behavior. My daughter does the same thing. And I see that there's something about him that's so loving and so not at all concerned with what's cool, what the popular kids are doing. He vibrates above that. And it's so beautiful to really have that every single day in my life and be like, okay, well, there might be kids who perform better than he does in school, but they don't have that same capacity for love and connection. And it's just, and to be present, like to be fully present. I joke, I am a yoga teacher. I teach people how to be present. And this child has taught me how to be present in a way that I never even knew existed. And this is just how he operates all the time.
Yeah, it's really amazing. It is. It's something the rest of us are striving to cultivate in our day-to-day experience, right? And
yes, absolutely. And I will say though that it doesn't come without its bumps in the road. And I think certainly if you're a parent and no parent expects this. No, nobody. And if you don't have something like Ashtanga yoga, meditation, a practice to care for yourself, I have seen it be really, really hard for some people who don't have the tools to steady themselves amidst the chaos and the constant twists and turns that happen. And I'm so thankful. I go back in time a lot mentally and thank my young 20-something self who really was disciplined enough to cultivate a yoga practice when her friends were doing who knows what out at night and stick with it, as I became a parent, because it really has been my North Star. And I can't say I would be able to see the beauty in the situation, and there is a lot of beauty, but I don't know if I would be able to see it or appreciate it if I didn't have tools for myself to feel good every single day.
Well, I'm sure like having a neurodivergent child can just take everything out of you, like with your patience, your energy, your, there's just something, even having a child does that, let alone a child that requires some special needs, some special attention, and then has all the external influences of society, like, coming down, on their behavior or their lack of behavior in certain instances, right? And so it's, I can only imagine how easy it is to get completely burnt out and overwhelmed with having to, expend so much energy and so much love, because you have all that love, but you're just like, it's just a constant demand on yourself. And I love that you just brought that up, that it's, if you're not having something that's filling your own energy and your own like self-care practice, that you're not doing something for yourself regularly, not like getting your nails done or something, but like really deep, I can only imagine how draining it is, like on every level of being.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it can be a lot when you're parenting a typical child.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You full stop.
Yeah.
And when you parent a different child, I think you turn the volume up on that a lot. And I liked what you said about how self-care that you're doing regularly that's not getting your nails done. I love getting my nails done.
Me too.
At the same time, it is not an activity that regulates my nervous system.
Exactly.
I love journaling. It is not an activity that regulates my nervous system. For better or worse. Ashtanga yoga, meditation, even hypnosis regulate my nervous system. I have just come to regard these things as medicine every day. And I take it seriously. If I weren't doing these things, I might need regular medication to get through the day, but I choose these things instead. So because I've chosen these things instead, I take them that seriously. And I'm committed to doing them. And I think that just reminding people that self-care can be fun sometimes, it can be restful sometimes, and it also is favorable if it calms and steadies your nervous system. Because one thing that I've come to realize in my own journey, and I see this with a lot of the parents that I work with, is that they've experienced serious trauma along the way, whether it was their child's diagnosis, which it was for me, whether it was their kid getting kicked out of school, and they weren't prepared for that. I had a client recently who told me that she was called into school the second week for a parent-teacher conference, and she got there and the school had packed up all her kids' things. And we're like, oh, you're gonna take her with you, bye. They were not equipped to handle her. There was no meeting about it. There was no, let's communicate about it and try to troubleshoot, nothing. And so she said, and I get it, so I've been there, every time the school calls, she like breaks out in a cold sweat, like panicking.
Right.
And it can be something so simple like, oh, she forgot her lunch today. Can we give her school lunch instead? Right. But in her brain, she's like, oh my God, it's the next shoe waiting to drop. And so I think it is worth looking at things that can calm and steady your nervous system, because if you had a traumatic experience with a child who didn't fit into the mold, and it turns into PTSD, which often happens, whether you've had a diagnosis or not, you're probably seeing symptoms of it, that can snowball very quickly into clinical depression, anxiety disorders. And so self-care, in the way I remind my clients to do it, is something that's regulating your nervous system, whether you're in the mood to do that or not.
That's
so that you
important.
Get out of fight or flight panic mode.
It's hard though if you're not in the mood.
That sounds like our lovemaking that way. I was
my husband, well, we're gonna take a hard detour now. My husband calls that pizza.
That's a hard detour. That's what I call it. That's exactly what I call it. Harmony.
He calls it pizza
This
sex.
is a hard detour.
Hard detour.
Hard detour. PTS. What's PTS?
He calls it pizza sex. Sex
pizza
like pizza.
He
says it's like pizza. Even when it's not that good, it's still good.
Half the time when we order pizza, she catches me in the kitchen having sex with it. That's true. It's exactly the same.
I would not be surprised at all.
Yeah, no, of course not. No one would be surprised to see Russell having sex with pizza. It's like, yeah, here we go. Here we go. Yeah. I would, that reminded,
I love it.
This reminded me, when I was in Taiwan, John Friend came to do a lesson, and my boss there told us that we all had to take a lesson with John Friends. There was 20 of us in the room, and it was a really weird, kind of hostile environment, and hostile, and like rife in the yoga class.
I think it was like at the height of the Anusara versus
Ashtanga. It was before Anusara died, and what I took from it is, one, he was inculcating a cult the whole time, and two, he kept doing an impersonation of the Rain Man in the whole class. Every other thing he would say, "I'm not wearing any underwear."
What?
Or he would like do the Dustin Hoffman thing, and I was like, "You're a sick fuck. You're making fun of the neurodivergent right here in a yoga class throughout the whole thing." I was like, Jesus Christ, man.
I'm gonna call what he was doing attention-seeking behavior.
Yeah. Thank you.
Attention-seeking behavior. And it's funny because I use that phrase like with the kids of the parent, my own kid and families who I work with, like when they act a certain way, you can tell like that's attention-seeking behavior. I'm not going to even engage with that.
Yeah.
But you'll see adults do this too, and that sounds like exactly what he was doing.
Yeah.
And it's also what I do. It's funny. The whole time that we were talking, I was waiting. It's like I had this loop in my head, like, oh, I've got to tell this funny story. I have to. And I was like just waiting and waiting and waiting for the moment that I could interject and tell my John Friend story. And I was like, I wonder am I on the spectrum? Jesus.
But here's the thing is that it's a spectrum. Right. So you probably have your things. It's like if you talk about sensory needs, everyone has sensory needs and things that do not feel good for them. And my husband always is really creeped out by different textures. Like if you open a jar of vitamins and there's cotton in there, he's like, ugh, that feels creepy. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's fine. Whereas he loves Right. Like he thinks weighted blankets are the most grounding, amazing things in the world. My son loves it too. And I put it on, I'm like, I feel trapped. I don't want any of this. But everyone has different needs and different things that are quirky, different about them, but everyone has it. So like I meet kids and the parents like, my kid has sensory processing disorder. And I said, well, everyone has sensory needs. Your child just might need to pay more attention to them to help them ground and center themselves right now. But it's not a bad thing that we're getting to know their sensory needs, because everybody has sensory needs and everyone has to manage theirs. That's why I always laugh when I see the memes about how you're old now when you have to parallel park your car and turn the music down.
Yeah.
Driving and you're lost, you have to turn the music down in order but the thing is that I read that and I laugh, because people don't realize when your sensory system is flooded, overwhelmed, your auditory is going to be the first thing to go for anyone, so that you can focus better. And think about it, if you're driving a car, you can't remove your visual sense, you have to see. You can't remove your tactile sense, you have to hold the steering wheel. So what's going to go? Your auditory is like, oh, let me shut this down so I can focus. So everyone's going to have sensory needs. I think from what I've come to understand is that these labels come in when your needs become a disruption to you living a daily life.
Yeah.
And so I think everyone is going to have moments where they have a loop in their head, like you said, a story that you can't get out of your brain, right? Or like that song that you can't stop singing. Everyone's going to have those types of loops. But for some people, those loops can be very disruptive and impede on their ability to function.
Yeah, my sense of humor is like that. I was gonna ask you if you knew the woman Temple Grandin, who
I know of her.
Yeah. So I had heard that she has been assisting the cattle industry for decades and applying her own self-knowledge about her neurodivergent needs, and saying the cattle have very similar needs. They like to be like you said with your husband. They like having a thunder coat. They like being held because it makes them feel safe. They don't like crossing boundaries from light into the dark. And often I think a lot of neurodivergent people struggle with transitions. And I was just wondering if you had heard of her, if you had any kind of because what you're describing is like you're applying your knowledge and your insight of your son to help other people.
Yeah, I think that Temple Grandin was one of the first people to really speak out as a neurodivergent adult, especially. And I think you might notice this, that now there are so many supports for kids and
not anymore,
not as many for adults. And,
Right.
and I think that when you speak of someone like your dad, you know, if he were to get diagnosed now in his 70s, what supports would there be for him? Maybe some you'd probably have to look really hard to find them. And would they be readily available? We don't know. So I think that she's been a great.
He's given a machine to work on every day, and he has a wife that doesn't speak English. I mean, the whole thing is perfect for him.
He's found his way.
Yeah, he's fine. Yeah.
But I think Temple Grandin has been a really important voice because she's not afraid to draw attention to herself. And I think that there's been, and I hate to say it, but it's true, but even in America, we live in a very inclusive society. There are a lot of supports compared to other places in the world for people with unique needs. And still, when you're a parent and you go into a meeting with your school district to talk about your kid, you are made to feel like you are the only ones asking for things. You are the only ones. It's true. You're the only ones who aren't fitting into the box. It's very disheartening for people. So I think the more adults like Temple Grandin who speak up and say, this is how I function in the world, this is what helps me. It may or may not help you, but why don't you give it a try and see if it helps you to feel more comfortable with yourself or how you function in the world is really important. And I think we're still just starting to see adults do that because I think that they probably grew up with a lot of shame and isolation. People not really knowing how to help them. Now, at least with kids, we know how to help them. It's talked about, you know, it's not this secret.
There's also more of an awareness around diagnosing it. But once people become like teenagers or young adults or even older adults, there's not so much attention around diagnosing it. It's interesting, unless, you know, you're going through a particularly difficult situation where like maybe somebody's, you know, you're going to a therapist or something, you know, and then they're saying, oh, you have like an ADD disorder, or you have, you know, you're obviously on the spectrum, and then you're like, what? I'm 40 years old.
This is exactly what happened to my husband.
Really?
Last year at 41 was diagnosed with ADHD. And as soon as he was, I was like, this makes so much sense.
Wow.
But it shows up differently in adults than children. And I could just tell something was not quite right with him. I could tell he wasn't really happy, you know, with where he was in his life. And I could just tell there was something. I didn't know what. I thought maybe it was still trauma that was not healed from Rocco's diagnosis or other things in his life. And I said, you know, babe, you need to go and talk to somebody. So we found a great EMDR therapist. It was a brilliant man. And he shows up to do EMDR therapy with this amazing doctor. And the doctor is talking about, you know, like, well, what do you want to work on, Ben? And Ben's talking to him while he's taking like all his vitamins in the morning. And the doctor's like, what are you taking? And he said, oh, I'm taking like bee pollen and ginkgo biloba. And I'm taking, you know, like all these energizing vitamins. And he's like, and you're drinking a coffee? And he goes, how would your wife feel if you gave her all these vitamins in the morning and drank a coffee? He's like, oh, she'd be in the hospital. She should be like jumping off the ceiling. And he's like, well, this is telling me about how your brain works, because Adderall and Ritalin, those types of medications are actually stimulants for the executive functioning part of your brain.
Right.
And the doctor is like, we can't do EMDR with you. We can't do anything with you until we know if you have ADHD or not, because it's going to affect how we work together and how you receive from therapy. Because what's the point of doing therapy if you're not taking anything from it because that's not how your brain works.
Right.
And so he printed out these questionnaires that
Mhm.
I had to fill out as someone who lives with Ben.
Right.
And I felt like I was filling out a questionnaire that was made for Ben. It was like all these things that I'd never put together. And I remember like the year before, I would tell him something. You know how parenting is, like you talk to each other while you're cleaning up the kitchen at night and,
Mhm.
before you go and sleep. And I remember I would tell him something and he'd absorb it, say, okay, acknowledge it. He'd leave the room, go take a shower, come back and say, he'd ask me the same question again. And I was
Right.
like, are you not listening to me? And he's like, no, he didn't know. And then he would do it again and again. And I was like, you're totally disregarding me. I was taking it personally.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we realized it wasn't that he wasn't listening at all. He was not absorbing the information because that's
Mm.
just
Gosh.
how his brain worked. And so it was so wild to go through that process of having him diagnosed because I kept asking myself, why were you never diagnosed as a kid? Why were you never given the supports? And it was because he did well in school. He
Mhm.
didn't
Right.
need any extra help. He did well socially. He didn't need any extra help. It didn't matter if he couldn't figure out how to shower, brush his teeth, eat his breakfast, get dressed, and leave the house on time in the morning. And he was late every day. Like that's executive functioning. He couldn't do things like that. But
Mhm.
people would kind of be like, he's just disorganized or he's just, whatever.
Messy.
But
Mhm.
right. But now we're realizing as all those things kind of built upon each other, his therapist is really shocked that no doctor ever down the line was like, maybe we should check this out. But this is
Mm.
what's happening with adults all the time because everyone's paying attention to the kids.
Yeah.
So it's very common for adults to say like, why can't I get up an adult in the morning? Why do I feel like I start one task and I can't finish it? And I'm all over the place. And they're beating themselves up for something that might just be how their brain works.
Mm-hmm.
I think I need to go see a therapist.
Yeah, that's we're both thinking the same thing, that Harmony is kind of struggling with ADHD, just like my mom. Do you
I
feel
think
like
it's very, very common. Very common.
do you
Yeah.
feel like there's a relationship there in your family between what Rocco is experiencing and other members? Do you recognize your son and other members of your family?
Well, we work with a really phenomenal doctor who specializes in kids with autism, ADHD, allergies, things like that. And he's got a really sharp sense of humor. And
Mhm.
you know who he is right away, and you know if you love him or hate him right away. And I love him. And Ben does too. But when we go in, you'd love him too, Russell. You guys would
Yeah.
banter all day long. But when we go in, he's, and I'll say, like, Rocco's got this going on, this and that. He'll look at Ben and he'll say, he's the apple and you're the tree. And he's
Right.
joking, but he's
Right.
also not joking because, he's picking up on things that probably have been passed down in a different, unique way. I think it's 50% of kids with a neurodiversity have a parent that also has it,
Right.
diagnosed or not. And that's
Right.
what people who I think are diagnosed. Can you imagine if all the people had their diagnoses, what the statistics
Right.
would be? A lot. So I think that it's interesting. I see things like that. Like Ben has a tendency to be very fidgety, which is
Mhm.
totally ADHD related. And I think that's something you see in a lot of people on the spectrum. If they feel, I want to say insecure or overtired or just not confident in a situation, you might see them get handsy or like pick up something and kind of stim on it frantically, or, like a self-stimulatory behavior to make
Mhm.
themselves feel like something is predictable, something is dependable. It's a very common tendency. So I see kind of that link between them. And it's funny, when Ben and I met, I was like, oh, he's just somebody who fidgets his leg. Like I didn't think anything of it, but there's definitely that. And I also see things that, I don't know if they're spectrum related or not, but I see myself in Rocco too. Like he's a thinker. He's very cerebral, and I'm that way. It's an Aquarian thing. We were talking about astrology earlier,
Mhm.
and I see a lot of things like that, and I can see how sometimes you might blame it on the spectrum, like, oh, he doesn't want to go and engage with those kids, or he might just not, It's
He
not that he
might
doesn't
just
feel
not
confident,
feel
he
like
might just
it.
not care. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's hard to say, whether
Mhm.
something is categorized as this is a spectrum tendency or not. But I definitely see both of us in him.
Mhm.
One thing I see in him that I'm the same is he really is dependent on eating high quality food to feel good. And I think this is the case of a lot of people, but
Your
I'm sure
son
you
or
see
your
people.
husband?
My son.
Son.
It's okay.
Yeah.
That's right.
I think Ben does too. He's not as diligent. He's still a very healthy eater compared to the general population, but I see that Rocco really is very sensitive to if he were to eat something that isn't bad, but just doesn't work for his body,
Mm.
he would feel noticeably different within the next 24 hours.
Yeah.
And I'm that way. And I know I'm that way because yoga is my benchmark. So I can
Right.
totally tell, like, oh, I had this last night. And then this morning in practice, my joints felt really stiff.
Right.
So I can tell that I am not allergic to things per se, but I really notice when things don't make me feel good. And he is that way as well. And one of his teachers said, he's like a Ferrari. He needs the highest quality fuel. And when you give him that, he performs
Yeah.
really, really well, like phenomenally well. But, he's not somebody who you can just throw whatever cheapest gas at the gas station in and expect him to function well. That's not.
Right. Yeah.
And I can relate to that a lot for myself too.
I love that you bring that up because I think that is one of the things too, that when your child does get diagnosed, if you have if you're working with someone who's really, tuned in to how food affects people, that's going to be like one of the first things they're going to start working on is like, well, okay, like you need to take out these certain foods and see how they're responding now. Right. Because I know certain foods can really aggravate the nervous system, which has to do with how you're thinking.
Yeah, your gut and your brain go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
And if your gut's unhappy, everything else is going to be unhappy. And the cool thing is that there's new testing out that really gives a good handle on how your body is affected by certain types of toxins, like mold toxins, pesticides, you name it, metals, all kinds of things. And we took the gluten and dairy out of Rocco's diet when he was 2, so 10 years ago, and he's done very well with that. And we knew this testing existed, but it used to be like $10,000. So we're like, we're not doing that. And then this past year, something happened and they lowered their price significantly. It's like under $500.
Wow.
So we decided to do it. And we've been on a health journey with him again for 10 years. And then seeing the things that were coming back from this testing, foods that you would never think are bad they're not bad. I think no food is good or bad. It's just, can your body work with it?
Yeah.
Foods that work really well for my body, like brown rice, quinoa, are like poison to him.
No,
right.
Jesus.
Yeah.
And reading through the pages and pages of like what's going on in his gut, aflatoxins, mycotoxins, you name it, all these things, realizing that you can buy organic, biodynamic cucumbers that are wrapped in plastic and styrofoam, and his body's absorbing the plastic and the styrofoam from the wrapper that you don't even eat. And it was just a mind-blowing thing to realize. And so back 6 months ago, we had to change his diet a lot again. And it was a lot of work. And so for parents who are feeling like, oof, this is a big undertaking, I want you to know, I feel you. I've been there. And he's a different kid now.
Wow.
Different kid. And I think that it was just us taking a closer look at how his body works. Things that he's sensitive to, I'm not.
Can you do a comparison of how he's different?
Yes. When you talk about a special needs kid, very often people use the word behavioral. I am lucky enough that I've worked with great doctors who always say, it's lazy to just throw around that term behavioral, because you're not going to behave a certain way unless your body is telling you to do it.
Yeah.
Really. But most people are too lazy to do it or don't know how to look deeper. And I've thankfully found specialists who I trust who do. So we changed his diet And he's a very happy boy, but he would have moments where he would just seem upset and we didn't really know why.
Right.
And now he's happy almost all the time. If he's upset, we know, like, oh, his allergies are bothering him, or he's got a cold or something. It's clear. He's just a happier kid. Also, something really interesting is that for about 6 months before we found out about this dietary change that we wanted to make, we do blood work regularly because he has limited language. He can't always tell us how he's feeling.
Right.
So I would say we do blood work quarterly. We also live out in nature, so there are ticks around, and it's good to check for Lyme's disease and things like that. So he had two things that kept showing up that we couldn't figure out. One was that his thyroid was producing antibodies or something that just didn't make sense. He didn't have a thyroid infection. There was nothing going on, but the antibodies kept showing up on blood work. Ditto with protein in his urine, his kidneys, like something was going on, but I took him to the kidney specialist, can't find anything wrong. We make this change to his diet. We repeat blood work 1 month later. All those things are gone.
Oh, interesting.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
a
it
low
was
level allergy almost that your body's like constantly needing to react to. Your immune system's like trying to fight off whatever, these.
Yeah, it was really wild. And
Wow.
1 month. And I remember thinking, well, whatever, I was feeling about this being a burden or annoying, because I was never somebody who wanted to make a different dinner for everyone in the family, and now I have this kid who like can't eat the things that make me feel good. And then, I couldn't even give him things that my daughter would like, in some ways. So I had to really figure out what worked for him. But then after we got that blood work, I didn't even care. Because I was like, this is worth it. It's annoying, but it's worth it. And I was really glad that I had that confirmation. And I think that's why a lot of parents give up with the dietary changes, is because they're kind of flying blind. They're reading a book and doing what they think is going to be helpful, and it is, but maybe they don't trust someone or know someone who can check internally and see what's going on. And so then it just becomes annoying to keep putting up the boundaries with grandma and grandpa who want to bring pizza over every week, or the birthday party thing. Like, I have people who say, like, is your son upset that he can't eat like everybody else? And I'm just like, he doesn't know any different, because we've always just had him eating things that help him. So I don't care. Like, it doesn't matter to me if he can't have like the cupcake with electric blue icing, because I'll bring him something he can have. He'll be fine with it. And it's everyone else like projecting their stuff onto him. But it was totally worth the trouble of looking closer, seeing what was going on. Also, we discovered that a lot of the things that were provoking his body to not feel good interfere with fat absorption, which is so important for your brain development. And so as we tweaked things like that with our doctor, it sounds funny, like my kids are a healthy weight for their height, but he looked more fit. His midsection looked thinner because he was absorbing the fat that he needed. And your body needs to absorb what you're giving it. So it was very interesting to notice those changes in a real tangible way, because I think a lot of people just get frustrated and tired of, like, when I first made him gluten-free when he was 2, I was like the wicked witch of the family. You would have thought I was withholding love from my child, and this was 10 years ago, before you could find
10 years ago it was different.
So it's like you were lucky to find gluten-free pasta that didn't taste like cardboard in the store, and now it's not even a thing, but
it's everywhere. It's every restaurant,
everywhere. But I had to be okay upholding my boundaries, because I knew it was good for him. And so what I did eventually was I told everyone who gave me pushback, would you like to come to our next doctor's appointment with us?
Yeah.
You're welcome to come. Please ask all of your questions. I'm happy to be there with you, and you can find out for yourself what I'm doing and see what you think about it. Only one person came once.
Someone came? What a dick.
It was a grandma, right?
It was a grandma.
it was props to my mother-in-law, and I love my mother-in-law, and I give her a lot of credit. Like, she cared enough to actually come and ask questions, because
Like,
All right.
you can't eat my pizza, you can't eat my pasta.
But you know what? She started making things that he could have after that, and no one questioned me again.
That's
and it
beautiful.
was wonderful. So yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
one thing I really love hearing you say is, you'll talk about getting a diagnosis and how it's really helpful to get a diagnosis, but it's not a diagnosis of a disorder. It's something it's a diagnosis of a unique gift, and it's a different,
or a sensitivity,
or
maybe.
a sensitivity. And so, even though you spend a lot of time disciplining and ordering your life, because it's not a disorder. And I really appreciate hearing that. And I think a lot of our listeners at home will as well, because people say, oh, everyone's getting diagnosed with some disorder these days, you know.
Yeah.
But you're obviously in a unique situation that was contributing to a lot of suffering and anxiety, and you needed help. And so getting that help is, I think, clearly been a purpose for you.
Yeah, I think diagnoses are both everything and nothing. It's a label. And sometimes you need that label in order to get what you need to help you in your life.
Yeah, right.
Like someone calling Rocco nonverbal. I don't subscribe to that, because he really communicates with me beautifully. We have a very close, trusting relationship. He really says what he can as confidently as possible. And you know what? He says more every day. So who am I to say that he's not going to just talk more and more and eventually talk perfectly? We don't know. I like to leave that open-ended. But for the way the world interacts with him, they need a way to classify him so that they know what to do. And what I've come to tell the people I counsel is that don't make it mean anything. I don't make his labels mean anything about him. They're just classifications so that the people around him know what they're doing and how to communicate with him and how to help him, but they don't mean anything about him. And I think, to what you were saying, Russell, about the diagnosis and, you know, the disorder way of looking at things, is that, like, there's nothing really to fix. I think if your body is not feeling well, like my son and his diet, that's something to fix.
Yeah.
But otherwise, there's nothing broken. And I think as a collective society, it's like, can we just stop trying to fix ourselves? Really? Like, think of the money the internet marketers are making, like trying to convince you that you're broken or something and that you need their program to go and fix yourself. Like, can we just accept that your brain might work differently and support it in the ways that you need, but there's nothing wrong with you. And I think that was something I really had to get over when he was little. I think one of the reasons why his diagnosis was so traumatic for me was because I thought it was something I needed to fix about him, or there was something wrong with him. And then eventually I came to realize, like, I don't actually want to change this kid at all. He's so cool. I want to make him feel confident in his ability to navigate his life by himself.
Right.
But I don't want to change who he is. If I could go back in time and change it, I wouldn't. And I say that wholeheartedly.
That's beautiful.
It's interesting, you know, when I want to follow that thread about him developing autism, if I can remember. But when I was working at an organization and I was media facing and having to give short sound bites to explain our position, because we were in choppy waters in California being sued. Having these categories and structures, or short, simple, I've lost my words, but what you were just talking, labels. Thank you. having labels to
Sticky
hand
notes
out and pass around, like, this is what's going on, was really helpful for a large audience to digest, and then they could go on being comfortable with their lives. It's like, oh, I see. This isn't this is this is self-regulation and learning tools of self-regulation. This isn't Hindu devil worship. Okay, I can go on, right?
Yeah.
And it's amazing how you can apply that to every other aspect of your life. So when I'm interacting with Harmony's family, I do the same thing. I give them short little sound bites to explain our situation, so they will leave us alone, and they're like, oh, they're fine, you know?
Yeah. People like labels. It makes them feel comfortable when they can wrap their head around something. Like, think about, when you go to meet the parents, right? When you go to meet Harmony's parents when you're first dating, and someone says like, well, what are you? Are you dating? Are you engaged? Are you married? Like, people want to put a label on it so that they can understand it within the constructs that they were given.
And Harmony's dad thought I was gay, so it was like totally understood what was going on.
I think he met you 3 times before he figured out we were dating.
He thought I was gay.
My mom's like, they're dating, right? He's
no,
no,
Russell's gay. No, I'm fucking your daughter. That's what's going on.
This is how it is. That's so funny.
He was like, so, what?
Yeah,
it's like a superpower that I have.
So funny.
I want to, but going back to Rocco, and I want to also hear more about your parents as well. But I feel like this is probably a little hot to talk about. Do you feel like environmental factors had anything to do with your son's development of an autism diagnosis?
Yes, I've actually done genetic testing on both my children to see what gene mutations they have going on. Rocco has a few different gene mutations that make it hard for him to detoxify himself. I do not have those. So I think that for everyone, there's a tipping point where their body is burdened. And when someone crosses that tipping point, that's where you might see chronic illness or autoimmune stuff, where things develop like that. And I think for many people, that is the case with autism too. And this is why I think you don't see autism until after age 1. You might see little things before that, but their body might just hit a tipping point. Who knows what's in the water they're drinking? Who knows what, are they eating food from a can and absorbing all that metal? Who knows what types of medications they've been given? Like, there could just be a tipping point where their body is so burdened by the toxic overload that they have to focus on that instead of focusing on something like speech with him. And it's kind of like you put the trash outside every day and the trash man just doesn't come.
And then it builds up. Yeah.
Right. So
I think they call that
specifically
epigenetics, right? When you have a gene that then is activated by the environment.
Yes, I think there are so many questions around the environment now. I certainly, went through a phase where probably right after he was diagnosed, I really took a hard look at everything that I was doing and was like, what did I do wrong? Because again, I made it clear that I'd done something wrong. I had my babies at home with a midwife, no drugs. I breastfed. They never had formula. I made all their food. I did all that stuff. So in my mind, I was like, but I did everything right. In my mind, whatever that means. How could this have happened? And so I really started looking more and more around like air pollution and water pollution and food pollution. Even in organic food, there are a certain amount of chemicals that are allowed unless you're buying food from a farm. And also looking at other things like, well, what can I help him do to detoxify himself a little faster so that he can feel good and his body can keep up with that? And yeah, there are environmental factors. People like to ask if I vaccinate or not. And I say, I don't answer that question because I don't want you to make your decision based on my decision. I want you to go and research and do your own research. And you decide if you feel comfortable with that or not. But I think that it's people who are looking for answers like that. Like, tell me what to do so that I can either avoid autism or heal autism or what.
Yeah.
Like, you have
I need a label to move on with my life.
I need a trajectory. I need a trajectory and I need specific instructions. But one of the things I've learned from working with a doctor is that different treatments work for different kids. Things that work beautifully for my kid. Medical marijuana has been a game changer for my child.
Wow.
Yeah. Don't work for other people. And when I asked the doctor why, and he's like, gene mutations. Did you ever have that friend in college who smoked pot and then went off the wall, like hyper and crazy and nutty.
That's
like,
us.
yeah, both of you. That's a
But
gene mutation.
both of us have brothers who are stoned every day, all day. We're not joking.
But it's true.
And they're stoned all day, and they don't have psychotic reactions to marijuana like Harmony and I do, with just the slightest bit.
Well, I believe you. That's a gene mutation. And so his doctor said to me, you know, when we test out medical marijuana to see if it helps him with his adrenal stuff and stuff we were looking at, only buy a week or two worth of a supply at a time, because if you give it to him and he's the kid who goes off the wall,
right,
you don't want to buy like 3 months worth and then have all that money like go down the drain. So it's like, just buy a little. Let's test
it'll get used. Don't worry, doctor.
Right? Like, seriously, it won't get wasted. That's for sure. But he said, you don't know until you try it. And there were certainly friends, people who I knew who tried it, and it was like, it didn't work for them. And so you can't give everyone a trajectory. Just like I did a Facebook Live with my yoga hat on for someone last year, and they kept asking, like, what are the 3 things that people need to do to be successful in their yoga business? And I was like, well, I don't know about your yoga business. Like, who are you working with? How long have you been doing this? What type of yoga do you want to teach? Do you want to teach in studios? Do you want to teach privately? Like, there's no cookie cutter thing that I can tell you. And people, I think, are scrambling for answers, and they want me to say there's a cookie cutter thing, but there's not. So I think you have to just test things out and see what works for you.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I think there's so much more awareness around like highly sensitive people these days, and having that even as like a slight, you know, neurodivergent disorder. We have a small puppy coming into my lap. And I feel like, you know, Jediah has that a little bit. You know, when he was really young, he wouldn't want anyone to touch his toys because we'd say, why don't you want us to touch your toy? And he's like, because it feels different after you touch it. I was like, whoa.
I'm so glad that you said that.
Yeah,
I meet people all the time whose kids are tested and evaluated, and they don't have any diagnosis, and yet they're different. They're energetically sensitive. And so, like, with those parents, there's a different conversation around how can you help your kid if the labels are not allowing them to get supports from other resources. What can you do? It doesn't mean they don't need it.
Yeah, and he had some interesting other things too. Like, he wouldn't want to feed himself because he didn't like to like touch the spoon because he felt like it was like contaminated. So like he had like these interesting ideas that didn't come from anywhere. It was just like he was just like super highly sensitive, and he could taste like he would never have breast milk like that was in the fridge. He always had to have it fresh. He wouldn't eat old food, like leftover food. He just wouldn't eat it.
Wouldn't touch it. Still won't.
Still doesn't. Like if it's leftover,
if it's a day,
forget about it. You throw it away. Like he's not going to eat it.
We eat the old food.
Yeah.
Like he's just really sensitive to things being, I don't know, clean and fresh.
At the same time, I think one of the best things that we've done for him is buy him a puppy, because it's amazing how self-soothing that is for him to have the puppy. And to be able to, it really changes his or he demonstrates a different aspect of his personality when he can have the puppy in his arms and hold it. And it reminded me what you said about, you know, you getting a golden doodle for your son. Have you heard of that book, Horse Boy by Kristen Neff? So Kristen Neff is I think famous in the mindfulness circles, but she and I used to practice yoga together with Sharon Moon in Austin, Texas. I think when I was 19, 20, her husband was a travel author, Rupert Isaacson, and they made a career off of this Horse Boy book, which is about their child with a neurodivergent diagnosis. And they happen to have a farm. And what they realized that the very best they could do for him was to get him around animals. And so when he was with the horses, that really transformed his personality. He was able to thrive the more time that he spent. They made a movie that I think got a Sundance Award called Horseboy.
Cool.
And it was really, really incredible. I'd like to try and introduce you to Christian if I could.
I love that.
But it's just, it's just interesting thinking about Jediah in that context, like of how they manifest different parts of the personality when they're in different situations, and something like
And it's interesting, like he won't eat ice cream, he won't eat pizza, he won't eat cake.
No, he won't.
Like he just regulates himself.
He's a little sugar sensitive.
I don't know exactly
Sugar
if
will
it's
make
the
him
taste, if it's he just doesn't feel good after he eats it, so he just says he
Dad,
won't eat it.
It's bread and cheese. Why? And then he said, he's just really very sugar sensitive. So sugar will make him death spiral.
Yeah.
Every time. But
so he's interesting that way, and that he's sort of like
thing.
No.
Yeah, and so we'll go over to my parents' house and everyone's eating pizza, and he like will have sushi or something, vegetarian sushi, because he also doesn't eat meat. So he's very
good.
He won't touch the Beyond Meat because it's too much like meat to his eyes.
I get that. Yeah, I get that a lot. It's funny because my daughter, because she did not have intense dietary needs, was the one that people would try to spoil with sugar food and stuff. Thankfully, she's not a quantity person. Like she can have a couple bites and be done. Yeah. But there was this one time, I feel like it was the end of summer vacation. It was her birthday. It was friends' birthdays. They were at the beach all the time. People were ordering pizza to the beach so they could watch sunset or whatever. And she came home one night. She showered. She got into bed, and I went to tuck her in. And she's like, "Mom, I just feel so terrible." I said, "Oh yeah?" She's like, I can't eat any of that stuff anymore." And in a way, I was so glad, because I didn't have to be the one to say, "Hey, it doesn't make you feel good." She figured that out by herself. She's like, "This does not make me feel good. My skin's getting rashes. I feel cranky and tired. Like, I don't like this. This is not worth it." And so now it's easy to remind her, like, "Oh, hey, you're going to a sleepover this weekend. Do you want me to send anything with you? Make good choices. I'm happy to provide dinner if you want." And, and she remembers herself. So it's nice that she's learning these things and figuring it out for herself. And I always laugh, because when I was a little kid, the thing that I really wanted was marshmallow fluff.
Yeah.
I would go to you remember that stuff? I would go to friends' houses and
rub my body with it.
They would have the fluffernutter sandwiches, the peanut butter and fluff on white bread. And my mom refused to buy it. She's like, "I'm not buying that garbage. There's, no."
100% sugar.
100%. And I begged for it. My sister begged for it, and she would never buy it. Yeah. And we eat it at friends' houses, and she hoped that would be enough. And then one day, my dad was a policeman, worked in the town where he grew up. So he always came home for dinner. My mom would cook. One day, he came home to this amazing Italian wife who cooked this beautiful home-cooked meal every night, and walks in and was like, "Guess what I have?" and pulls out a jar of marshmallow fluff while like dinner's on the table, ready to be eaten. My mom must have been so pissed. And he's like, "I still remember the shrieking that you girls did. Like, you jumped on your chairs like you'd never seen food before, and you were freaking out. You were so excited." He said, and then you both ate a fluffernutter sandwich for dinner that night. The rest went into the fridge for leftovers for the next day. He said, and then that jar sat in the cabinet for years until we threw it away. It's like the novelty had worn off, and you didn't want it anymore. He said, like, I knew I had to do it because you were getting obsessed with something that was forbidden.
Right.
And I had to just like nip it. And with Rocco, it's a little different because he's so sensitive that we don't even go there, because we've seen him eat something that doesn't work for him by accident usually.
Right.
Or, if someone gets a bagel, we live in Long Island, someone gets a bagel and cream cheese and leaves it out, and then he goes over and takes a bite of it. Like, he doesn't feel good the rest of the day. Yeah. We don't even bother with him, but in some ways he's easier because he just knows, like, I don't even want to, like Jediah, like, this is not for me.
Yeah.
I don't need to test it.
And,
which is helpful.
And do you recognize yourself in your children? Do you feel like growing up in Boston that you have anything similar about yourself? Or I'm also just trying to just take a little tangent and find out more about you and what you were like as a 10-year-old girl.
I was like a perfectionistic type A overachiever. child.
It's so surprising. Okay.
This is why I needed yoga.
That's why you did Ashtanga yoga. Let's be honest here.
But no, I did Ashtanga yoga because I tried all the different yogas that I could find.
Well, we're skipping 10 years here, Harm. Can we just keep it? Let's get from 10 to 12 to 14 before we get to 20.
She said she was a perfectionist. Okay. How much more do you need to know?
I remember being a little kid and feeling like I always had friends. I did exceptionally well in school. I felt like I had a lot of self-imposed pressure to do that. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I always kind of felt like I didn't belong. For no external reason, I had friends, I did the activities and played the sports and all that stuff, but I always just felt kind of different. Maybe it's an Aquarian thing, maybe it's a spiritual thing. I don't know.
It's the Atman separate from the Paramatman.
Yeah. And I think that I ended up in all girls Catholic school for high school because
now here we are.
I was made fun of. Middle school is such an awful age. I shouldn't say it's awful across the board. It was awful for me. And I was in public school at the time, and I liked school. I found it interesting. And I remember I came home and I said, Mom and Dad, I always want to raise my hand in class, but I don't anymore because I feel like people will make fun of me when I know the answers.
Good.
And and my dad was kind of like, that's wrong. School should be a place where learning is encouraged. And so I started looking for an environment that felt safer for me, actually. And so I really liked the all girls environment. And I liked that there was just a baseline for decorum, act mature, you're not allowed to make fun of people. You're not allowed to be a bully. Like, this just doesn't exist here.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that felt really safe. And my bullying was never that bad. I don't even know if I would call it bullying. I would call it teasing or something, but I felt like I couldn't.
What you were doing to the other girls, you were bullying them. You wouldn't call it bullying.
No.
They would probably call it bullying. What
they
you were doing.
I was obviously making them feel, I don't know. I like
inadequate.
Yeah, something like that. Something. And it was like the Mean Girls scenario, like that movie. I remember watching that movie with my husband years ago when we were dating. And I was like, oh my God, this was just what middle school was like. And he's like, that's awful.
Yeah.
And I was like, I recalled everything that was going on. And I can't say it was bullying, because I was never physically threatened, but I didn't like it. It didn't feel good. And I didn't feel like I was able to be who I was. So I looked for an environment where that felt acceptable. And then even with college, I ended up at Boston University because it was so big. You could find your people. And that's why I love New York too. Like, you're going to find your people, no matter how weird you are, no matter what you're into. You don't have to worry about fitting in to this certain box. And while I did not have any type of neurodiversity, it really made me understand the concept of like, okay, I have a neurodiverse child and he's being told, oh, you don't fit into this box. Well, then you have to go over here and do this. Well, maybe these boxes are outdated and not really serving people in the way that they're supposed to anyway. So let's see if we can adapt the box a little bit. And I think that certainly discovering yoga around 18 and then dabbling with it.
Was it a college course?
No, my first ever yoga class was during my senior year in high school when we read A Passage to India.
Cool.
One of the teachers was doing yoga just for her own betterment and taught us all a yoga class.
Yeah.
And it was cool and I really liked it. And then I went to Boston University and did yoga at the gym for a couple of years and I liked it. And certainly in Boston, when I was in college, there was kind of this yoga scene with the hot yoga, like the Bikram yoga studios and the Baptiste yoga studios were always kind of competing. And Baron Baptiste was from Massachusetts. So it was like, he had his kind of home base right there. Yeah. And so I just started going to different types of classes and seeing what I liked. And I remember my Bikram teacher at the time said, hey, this guy, David Swenson's coming to town. It was my senior year.
He
And
recommended cross. Wow. Okay.
yeah, he was getting curious around, Bikram was starting to feel a little bit weird to him, and he
Beyond
was like,
Bikram.
I think we should start pursuing, yeah, and props to him. I still keep in touch with him and his wife, who were both my teachers in the very beginning. They were Bikram
That's
teachers, but
amazing.
very open-minded and great human beings. And I remember talking to him about David Swenson, and he took out the David Swenson practice manual.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought, I had done yoga at the gym that was called Ashtanga. So I thought I had done Ashtanga.
Right.
Finished it. Yeah.
Right. So he said, I'm going to go to this David Swenson 40-hour training,
Yeah.
in a couple of weeks. I was like, that sounds cool. I'm going to come. So I signed myself up. I took a week off of my classes in my senior year, right before graduation, and went to David Swenson's 40-hour training, thinking I knew what the primary series was.
Yeah.
And I turned up there and I knew pieces of it, but I had never done it properly.
Yeah, like Garbhapindasana.
Never Garbhapindasana, never heard the Sanskrit counts, never even seen a Chakrasana. And yet I was there and I was welcomed. David was wonderful. And I was the youngest one there. And a lot of those people had been teaching for a long time. And here I am, this person who'd been dabbling in yoga. And I would say consistently so. Like I was a solid 4-day-a-week practitioner at least. And I could tell there was something here for me with yoga. And I felt like there was more that I was looking for. And when I did that week with David Swenson, I remember thinking, this was really hard. And my mind has never felt so quiet in my life. I had been getting really intense anxiety attacks, probably for the previous year. And that's why I started doing yoga, even Bikram, more consistently, because I had a really good doctor at the time. We talked about, I didn't want to go on meds for anxiety. She didn't want me to until I tried other things. And I felt like after yoga, I was different. And I couldn't articulate it. I didn't know why. I didn't know how it worked. I just knew that I felt different.
Right.
And so I started going more and more. And my dad took my mom aside one day and he's like, I don't know what she's doing. Is this yoga stuff a cult? I don't know.
Yeah.
Said, but she needs to keep doing this because it is good for her. She's different. So that David Swenson week really kind of cemented in, like, of all the practices that I've tried, this is the one that really makes me feel the most different. So I'm going to keep doing it. So then I practiced for the rest of my senior year in my dorm room with the practice manual next to me. And that was how I became a practitioner. And a year and a half later, you'll think this is really funny, I took my first ever Mysore class at the Shala in Mysore.
Right. My God. What were you?
That took some guts. I don't know what possessed me.
Did I meet you then, Sarah? Was that the year we met?
That was 2005.
Yeah, 2000. That's when we met.
What were you studying in school at the time?
Marketing and organizational behavior.
And was your anxiety, was it academic related?
I think it was related to a lot of things. I was in the most rigorous academic semester of my college years when it started. 9/11 had happened a couple weeks before.
Yeah.
And certainly going to Boston University, I had friends who lost parents.
Yeah.
Sitting next to me, when that happened. And I think it really just made me think about life and mortality in a different way. I remember like walking a friend out of our classroom to go find a phone to find out if her dad was alive or not. Like it was really, I think, one of those moments that in the moment you handle it well. My parents are a policeman and a nurse. I was raised to handle emergencies.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
But afterwards you're sort of like, wait, there's something for me to process here.
Yeah.
And then so I was dealing with that. I was in a relationship that was very toxic, with a boyfriend that was very toxic at the time, who I didn't know it at the time, but he was verbally abusive. And
he was from Boston.
I think he went to school in Boston. He wasn't from Boston.
Oh, okay.
And I think that it was just a lot of these things, and my body my nervous system was just at a point where it sent me a message like, knock, knock, hello, time for you to do something. And of course, yoga was the thing that brought me clarity.
Mhm.
So it was the thing that made me feel like I could leave that toxic relationship and just be by myself. It was okay
Yeah.
to be by myself.
Yeah.
It was the thing that made me feel like, I don't need to decide between law school and Wall Street today. I can just take the summer and work a random job and figure it out. Maybe I'll go to my yoga training actually, and that's exactly what happened. And so it really just gave me the clarity that I was searching for, but I didn't know I was searching for it at the time.
Mhm.
I was in New York at the time, and I
Mm.
watched it happen, and
Oh yeah.
the 9/11, and I remember it felt very much like living suddenly inside of a cocoon in New York, where
Yeah.
we were all people who were experiencing it, and there was
Yeah.
everyone else outside of it was kind of going on with their lives. I remember like calling my folks in Texas, and they were like, yeah, we stopped thinking about it today. It's like, oh really? Well, we're still thinking about it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
about a month later, that airplane fell out of the
Yeah.
sky and landed on a friend's house, actually, that I knew
I remember that.
in Long Island, in Brooklyn. And I remember my dad called me that day, and he said, Russell, how are you doing? I heard that a plane fell near you in Brooklyn. And I just like, yeah, that kind of thing happens here all the time, Dad. It was just such a very
Wild.
traumatizing,
Yes.
weird time that you're normalizing as immediately.
Yes. I remember, talking about it with a friend recently, and this is a friend who I've met maybe in the last 5 or 6 years, and we were talking about like, where were you when that happened? She's like, I was pregnant with my second at that time, and watching the news and telling myself, and she lives in Canada, she's like, everything's fine, but I was not fine. But I was telling myself that I was fine so that I could function.
Yeah.
But I was not fine, and I think that happened to a lot of people. Like, just you click into survival mode, and you tell yourself that you're fine to get through it. And then I always noticed that I wouldn't have the anxiety attacks when I was like out with friends or doing things like that. I would have them when I was home trying to go to sleep. I would have them when things were quiet, like if I were sitting in a quiet movie theater. I really think that they were a way of teaching me how to just be with myself, and be with my feelings, and process things that I would have probably just pushed down and soldiered on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like with the pandemic and stuff too, I think we're all kind of, I mean, that's a big generalization, but I think a lot of people are experiencing that kind of like post-trauma, effects now, because things
how
are,
weird is this?
Things are kind of opening up, and it's not, even that things are opening up, it's just like for 2 years you just like weren't processing things, and now it's like, okay, well, it's kind of ending. I mean, maybe hopefully, right? And
we're moving on
whether it's ending or not. And so now like there's this space where all these feelings, or all this like maybe even fear or anxiety or things that you were just like shoving down before and like getting on with it because there was nothing else to do, is now kind of like coming up. And I think a lot of people are experiencing anxiety now, or depression, or just like chronic fatigue, like their nervous system's like, oh my God, I just want to sleep for like 6 months and reset.
Yeah. And I think that it's great to start just nurturing those conversations around, there's nothing wrong with you if you feel like you're exhausted. And are sleeping more than you normally do, or taking naps and you normally don't, or feel like you've never seen a therapist before, but now you feel like you need to, like, go do those things, listen to yourself.
It's not a disorder. You're just resetting and healing.
Resetting and healing.
Wow.
Absolutely.
So how do you go from this deeply anxious place, you're probably a little traumatized, and then it's like, I'm gonna go to the most fucking crazy place on earth.
I'm gonna go to India.
How does that work? at all.
There were a few years in between where I was just getting more and more acquainted with the practice. And I
Were
lived
you
in Long
practicing
Island.
with someone or just by yourself?
I had a practice buddy, Stacy Plasky in Long Island.
Stacy
I taught at her
Plasky.
studio.
Stacy Plasky.
I taught at her studio, and so we would practice together between the
Nice.
classes.
Yeah.
And then a couple of the other teachers would join us, and a couple of the other teachers would join us. You know, slowly, our little practice through. And we were a bit like the blind leading the blind, because none of us had been to Mysore yet. But Stacy was the first to go, and she came back. And she was like, "You really need to go." I said, "Okay." And so it was one of those things that, or when I told my parents I was going to go, for me, like, they were surprised that I was taking this route, but at the same time, they were not surprised, because they were like, if you're going to do something, you're the type of person that really does it. Like, you're not, if you're going to go to the source to figure this out and see if it's for you or not, you know? And so I went in 2005. And I thought that I was going to go and get it out of my system. Right. Like,
sure.
A young woman, and I was in love.
Like marshmallow fluff. Just go.
Yeah, right.
Marshmallow fluff.
Together. And I think that my family thought I was going to go have this like eat, pray, love adventure, and then come home and be responsible. Like, buy a house and have a mortgage and have babies right away and do that thing. And then
good stuff.
Yeah. And then a year later, I was like, I think I need to go again. Right. And yet I wasn't expecting that. It just sort of happened. And it happened because I was seeing the practice heal me more and more on so many levels. And I felt such a supercharge of that when I was in India, that I thought, I'm just going to keep doing this. It's helping me. If it's helping you, why stop doing it? Right. And I think that's how I am still. You know, people ask, like, do you practice still, even though you don't teach all the time? Like, of course, practice is my North Star. Like, why would I stop something that's helping me so much?
Right.
This is not a trend. And right. And I think that for me, that going to India, I didn't know it would be like this, but it really taught me a lot about myself. It was my first time away from the societal systems and structures that I grew up with. And it really just pushed me out of my comfort zone in so many different ways. And I was so thankful that I had that experience, because it forced me to ask big questions about myself and my life that I don't know if I would have asked at 24 years old. If I just stayed in my comfort zone all the time. So it was a really beautiful experience amidst the chaos of India, with the cows in the road and you know, the noise and the dirt on your feet and all of that. It was very special.
There's something that I love about India too, that I think we don't have so much in our culture, but like, you know, I think because of the way that their society is, and they don't necessarily have like a really great medical system in place, you see a lot of things that you don't see in our society, right? Like a lot of different deformities or different like skin sort of conditions or colorations or like bad teeth or like just, I mean, all very, I'm just thinking like all very physical things, but people are just treated like nobody's treating them different. Nobody's like reacting to them differently. They're just like talking to them like totally normal, right? And for us, absolutely. I feel like in Western culture, when people have like different noticeable things, like there's leprosy. Always like leprosy or, you know, deformities from polio or whatever, right? There's always like a little bit of like a,
don't know what to do with this label,
like an energetic kind of like, this is like different.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, you were in India and I was in India early enough where having to make a phone call was a big deal. Going to use internet was a big deal. Certainly only recently have I had apartments when I go there that have a washer in them of clothes.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I remember bucket laundry, you know, and
Totally.
doing that, or having the laundry lady, you know, and
Yeah.
paying her 10 rupees per piece or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I remember coming home after my first trip and feeling like, wow, what I thought was the real world is not actually the real world. Like, I remember going into my basement and the little house that we rented at the time, and like standing in front of my washer and dryer for a minute and being like, I am thankful for you. And
Yeah, my
I
God,
love
right.
you.
I don't know if I even thought to be thankful for my washer and dryer before, because why would I? It's just a
Yeah.
convenience that everyone has.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then when you do your laundry in a bucket for a month and you see people whose job it is
To
and they earn
pound
their
laundry.
living to
Yeah.
pound laundry, it's just like, oh wow, the little things that I never even noticed before, I will never take for granted again.
Yeah.
And to what you said too, of like just treating everyone who's around like a regular person.
Yeah.
I noticed that's how my son likes to be treated. He loves to be around the regular kids at recess and during music class and like all the other things. And he doesn't care that he's different than they are. He likes to be included in their fun and chaos and
Yeah.
the whole mix. That's just what he likes. It makes him, is a motivator for him. It makes him feel really good.
Mm.
And I have noticed this a lot in the last couple of years, because before that he went to a special ed school.
Mm-hmm.
Now he goes to a regular public school, and he's doing so much better in the regular
Wow.
public school. He was bored to death in the special
Right.
ed school, and not all special ed schools are bad, but the one that he was going to was not really attentive to how smart he is.
Mm-hmm.
They sort of looped him in with the generalizations they made about kids with his diagnoses.
Mm-hmm.
And now that he's in an environment that is more supportive of him and treated like one of the guys, he's thriving beyond what anyone thought he was capable of doing.
Amazing.
And it's so cool to see that. And I remember it reminds me of, he had a speech therapist when he was little that had a plaque in her office, and it said, "My teacher thought I was smarter than I was, so I was."
Oh,
And I love that, because I mean, you see that in the yoga room too. Like,
yeah.
when you're encouraging your student to do something that's terrifying to them and they think that they can't, and
Yeah.
you just lovingly guide them and give them the support, and over time they build the confidence and they do this thing that they thought was totally impossible before.
Yeah.
They start to ask themselves, well, what else?
Yeah. What else
Mhm.
is possible?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I should
Yeah.
think about this a little bit. And I think the same is true for people with neurodiversities. And so
For sure.
I'm always looking for those people who are the ones to help them achieve that thing that maybe the general public doesn't think they're capable of doing.
Mhm.
And I have seen this in my life. I have videos of my son doing things that the physical therapist said he had the core strength to never do. Like, he'll never do that. Never saying, do you want to see a video of him doing that? Or a speech therapist in school saying he'll never be able to do this, that, or the other thing, or he can't do that. And I remember being at meetings and saying, I have a 1-minute video of him doing that. This could affect how we support him going forward. Do you want to see it? And they would say no.
No, no thanks.
No, because it
Yeah.
didn't match up with the testing on paper that he did or something else. And I was like, this is a bunch of
Yeah.
bullshit. Sorry, I don't know if I can curse on your podcast.
You can.
Okay. I was like, this is
For
such
fuck's
bullshit.
sake,
They're-
would you not?
For fuck's sake.
This is, we have our audience is not.
They were just committed to
Mm.
the labels, the systems that worked for them. They weren't committed to the individual that was right in front of them. So I really feel like that's my job in this world, is to help people push back on the boundaries that are imposed on them and say, well, what if we just try? What about
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the things you often hear in America when you're that parent like me, who's asking for things that are not normally given,
Mhm.
is exactly that. Well, that's not normally given to kids with this diagnosis. That's not normally given to things like, you know, with this case or that, you know, delay or whatnot. I'm like, well, what happens if we just give it this time?
Mhm.
We touch base in 3 months
Yeah.
Mhm.
and then we'll see. And if it doesn't work, we'll stop giving it. But like, why can't we? But I realize a lot of parents aren't even confident enough to ask those questions. They're not confident enough to be that person who pushes the boundaries and stops people pleasing. So
Hmm.
that is
Yeah.
that
I,
is my work all the time.
I have
It's
a
beautiful.
I have a little story, and I don't want to be self-glossing like this, but it's I think it's kind of relevant. When I was in the 4th grade, my principal told my mother that she wanted me put into the special needs class, that I was developmentally retarded, I think is how they would have phrased it at the time.
Yeah.
And my mother was like, no, he's really smart. I was like, no, we're not seeing that. He's failing all of his classes. And of course I was, my parents were divorcing and there was a lot of chaos so at home. But we did the California Achievement Test, which I'm not sure if they do anymore, but that was a big thing when we were in elementary school. And they didn't do it in Canada, of course, because they don't have a California in Canada. But they did the California Achievement Test and we took it. And I remember suddenly, for the first time, really fitting in and like, this day was so much fun. I got a little pencil and an eraser, and I had it in a test and had little circles on it. And you filled in the little circles. And it was like, this is the best day of school I've ever had.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting down and like just concentrating and doing everything. And I got a 98% for the national test. And there was no other kid in certainly that school or that county or that part of Illinois that was anywhere close to a 98%.
Yeah.
And it was like a bomb had gone off at school. Like, did he cheat? But there was no one that I could have cheated off of who was anywhere close to my score.
That's
And
wild.
And what I had been doing, which no one had really paid attention to, is I had kept a science fiction book underneath my desk, and that's all I had done the entire year was read Robert Heinlein and Piers Anthony and Roger Zelazny, and all I had done all year was read and had not paid one fucking bit of attention to the teacher, and that's why they thought I was retarded. And
Right.
so then they put me in all of these accelerated classes because I was the best student in Southern Illinois. And again, I failed all of them because I wasn't actually equipped to take accelerated courses. I was just really adept. That's very different from being equipped.
That's really wild.
Yeah.
And I love
It's a
how when
mess.
people, that's really, really wild. And I think that there's so much here around what inspires a child, what motivates a child to learn. How do different brains learn? Visual learners, tactile, kinesthetic, auditory, like how do different brains learn? One is not better than the other. Just like kindergarten is not better than 12th grade. Right. You're going to need all of them, but you have to try and figure out, you're not going to teach the kindergarten what you're learning in 12th grade. So it's the same thing with how people learn. And oh my God, that teacher of yours must have been so boring if you were just reading your books on the desk. I'm thinking to myself, like, you must have been the most uninspired kid in that class. Yeah. Who's like, this is stupid. I just want to do something that's stimulating to me, and read your book. I probably would have done the same thing.
Yeah. When you told us that you had read all of Game of Thrones, I was wondering if you were that kid.
I was the kid. I didn't often read in school, but I would do my homework during class so that I wouldn't have to do it at home.
That's so funny that you brought that up, because I was just going to bring that up, because that's what my son does. He does all of his, he'll skip playing with his friends at lunch or whatever to do all of his homework. Yeah. So that he doesn't have to bring it home. And so then we have parent teacher interviews, and the teacher's like, he really needs to bring his homework home. He shouldn't do it in class. He shouldn't do it at lunch. And I'm like,
but he's doing 10th grade math at home. So, and then, he does that in half an hour, this Kumon stuff. And then he spends 4 hours doing project management online with his friends.
Playing video games.
Video games.
I was going to say, is he an employee in your organization? Because you should hire him. Sounds very organized and self-motivating.
It's like a criticism towards him, right? Like I really need to encourage him to bring home homework. And I'm like, well, I can ask him to bring home homework.
But he's doing 10th grade math.
He
does. My daughter's the same way.
Polynomials.
And I finally had to tell her, like, honey, there's a reason you have recess. You need to move your body. You need to get a change of scenery and get fresh air, even if you're just outside reading a book. Like, and she usually goes and plays anyway, but I was like, you can't use recess time to do your homework unless it's pouring rain out.
Right.
And the funny thing is, if it's pouring rain out, they still have recess in the gym, but it's noisy and like all the kids are loud and the ball's bouncing and the sneakers squeaking on the floor. She hates it. Rocco loves it. Loves indoor recess. And like is happy as a clam in there. And she's like, oh, it's so noisy. And that was the same thing about the bus in the morning. She's like, I don't know if Rocco's gonna like the bus in the morning. It's too noisy.
She's sensitive.
My friend, I talk to her, but he loves it.
Yeah.
So like,
that's one of those things, the highly sensitive like people, if it's noisy like that, it's really challenging to feel good inside.
Sometimes. You have I wanted to ask you, I'm trying to understand this. You have your Instagram and you post episodes on your Instagram every couple of days. Are those from a podcast that you do?
Yes, I have a podcast called Full Potential Thriving with Autism.
One of the episodes is, well, maybe I should let you explain that a bit further. I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
It's a podcast, even though it has autism in the title, any neurodiversity would benefit from it. If you're parenting a child with any type of neurodiversity, definitely listen, because there are a lot of tools in there that are not the tools that are talked about in schools a lot of the time. And I've discovered that there's a whole world around how to build a relationship with a child, how to connect socially, how to advocate for your family, how to do all these things that they're not teaching you in the school settings. So I bring out an episode every week to people who listen and are looking for more tools so that their family can thrive, especially if they're not fitting into the boxes.
Fantastic.
Beautiful.
I saw an episode on your Instagram, I saw a few of them that were particularly interesting that I wanted to ask about. One of the episode titles was The Real Cost of Raising a Neurodiverse Child. And I wanted to know if you could talk more about that here. Like, what is that cost and what did you mean by that?
Well, there are statistics that I took from Autism Speaks organization. And again, these are the people who are raising their hand and talking about it. So I think that there's probably a lot more that's not being talked about, but there are significant costs. I believe that the average family who has a child with autism spends $60,000 a year on autism related things, whether it be the right therapies, medical treatments,
or those tests for like what you're allergic to.
Right. What we're seeing in the United States is that, how we have health insurance different from other countries. A lot of the really great doctors aren't taking health insurance anymore because it pays you for a 10-minute visit when this doctor needs an hour with you. So,
well, you know what, even in Canada where we have public health insurance, it doesn't cover things like that. Like any special needs, it's very difficult to get coverage for. You basically have to, get social services involved or pay for it out of pocket. Right.
Some of the costs also that have to be considered are, my daughter's 10. I can leave her home alone if I need to run to the store and come back. Not a problem. With Rocco, I can't.
Yeah.
He's just more curious. He'll just get into things that, I think he would be fine, but I don't want to test it and decide, see that's the day he plays with the stove. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it requires a lot more of a care team, whether it's babysitters or people who support these individuals. And also, as kids get older, we want them to have a more independent life. That takes time and energy. So, for example, I can tell my daughter, hey, pack your school lunch for tomorrow. And she might, get distracted once or twice, but she'll do it and does not need any managing. Rocco, in the beginning, needed someone to sit here and show him where to go and get the things in the house, because even though he knows the bread is in the fridge, he's never had to make his own sandwich. So gathering all the ingredients together, reminding him, first you're going to open the jars, then you're going to take the bread out of the bag, and just showing him step by step what you do. This is the boring, unsexy work behind the scenes that happens that makes a unique child with delays be an independent adult. And at the same time, parents might need to have a career to pay bills, and you might have to hire people to help you. So there's a lot that goes into parenting a unique child that you may not always think about. Also, unique diets. Keto bread that I get from my son is the most expensive bread that you can possibly find.
I
right?
know. Yeah.
Right.
We're all over it.
Right. So the average cost of an average family is $60,000 per year. Now factor
Jesus.
into the situation that usually one parent quits or cuts down on their job to be a primary caregiver for a unique child. That's something that also plays into the mix. Parents or mothers specifically who work, and I can't remember the statistic off of my head, but they make, I want to say 30% less if they are in the workforce, because they are maybe taking more days off or working limited hours when they have a child that just needs them more. So it's a lot. And
that's on top of women already making like 25 cents less or 30 cents less than men. So it's sort of like a double pay deduction.
The amazing thing is how much more productive women are as workers than men.
Exactly.
And so it's really you're getting value for money when you hire a woman.
Yeah, totally. And so these are the things that, you know, you may not always think about, but also if you're like me, I am committed to working with the amazing doctor. I'm committed to making sure my son has medical marijuana, which is not covered by insurance, of course. It's not a federally approved thing. So that's hundreds of dollars a month. So, you know, vitamins and supplements that their blood work might show that they need. That's something that you can't just do when you feel like it. It has to be consistent. It's hundreds of dollars a month. So these are things that are real concerns. And I have noticed in working with people that many of them, even if they have the money now to do something they want to do, they're almost scared to do it because they don't know what they're going to need next month for their kid.
Totally.
What if they have to hire this independent person to evaluate speech or whatever? And so they're always sort of on the lookout for, could there be something that I need to put money into to help my child?
Right.
And even things with your house, like
Sure.
Rocco is very light sensitive. So we have a finished basement and we put his room down there. It's a beautiful room. It's got nice wood floors. We put the venting for the heating and AC in there because he sleeps really well without light coming in. But, you know, when we lived further west, we were like looking for all the different types of curtains and blinds for the house that would make his room dark enough that he would sleep well when the sun's coming up at 5 a.m. in June. And so things like that you don't always think about are real needs when you have a kid who's more sensitive.
I was wondering if you were going to talk about your own emotional energy body, like if, you know, that cost as a parent.
Yeah, that's a great point. I definitely prioritize my own well-being, and I'm thankful that I had many years of doing that and managing my own energy before I became a parent, because I think that I became a parent and then I became a parent to a unique child and then a second child all within the span of 18 months.
Right.
And it was a lot. And so I can't say that I would have built habits, spiritual practices at that time. I'm thankful that they were already routines that I had and that I prioritized. And I don't know how woo-woo you want me to get with my energy body stuff, but I can really go there. I always felt there was a reason for me to have a unique child, and I didn't know what it was, but I have studied enough spirituality in my life. I practiced yoga. I've always felt an energetic connection. And I really just trusted that there was a reason this was happening, even if I didn't intellectually know what it was. And I feel like now I'm at the point where I know what it is. And I feel like this child chose me, chose this path. And I've often reminded myself, like, he's having the journey he's meant to have on this planet too. And it helped me a lot when I was feeling like I wasn't doing enough, or maybe I'd done something wrong.
Right.
it really helped me tremendously to remember that, oh wait, he chose this. He chose us as parents. He chose this time to incarnate on this planet. He chose to come here to make an impact in whatever way he's supposed to. And for me, in a way, it helped me to take my self-worth out of our journey together, my journey as a parent, because I think there was a time where my energy was very heavy because I felt like if Rocco had a bad day, it meant I was worthless. You know, if he wasn't doing well in school or had a health challenge come up, well, that must mean something about me as a parent. And I think that even thankfully, I was still doing yoga at that time. It felt really intense, and it made me ask a lot of questions about, you know, God and energy and spirituality and purpose. Like, why is this happening? I trust it's here for a reason, but really, like, I don't know. And I'm thankful that through practice, I work with a shaman, a real shaman. You're not going to Google him and find him. He's a real legitimate shaman. And he's really helped me a lot in recent years and reminding me of the journey that Rocco's taking on this planet too. And
beautiful.
And I feel like we're able to sort of take our journeys side by side and support each other in that beautiful way. And I'm not tangling myself up in what his journey means about me.
Wow.
Yeah, it must be such a big journey to like transition from that place where you're really questioning your enoughness even, right?
Yeah.
And feeling like you could never be enough to support this being, to moving into this space of you're doing your work and they're also doing their work.
Yeah, it started to click with me a few years ago. You know, in Montauk, where we live and where we surf all summer, there's a lot of kooky people. That's why we love it here. You can just be your kooky self, and you don't need to fit in. And we love it. And so Ben and Rocco always surf together. Ben taught Rocco how to swim. He taught Rocco how to surf. And one day he walked down the beach after surfing. It was a beautiful day. And he's like, hey, I bumped into this guy as we were surfing, and he wants to make a documentary about me and Rocco. And I thought, he's just one of the kooks at the beach, probably smoked a little pot at sunset time. Like, that's nice, honey, but whatever. I didn't think anything of it. And then I met this guy the next week. And I was like, oh no, he actually is a legitimate film producer.
No.
I can hear what he has to say. And then there started to be talk about making a documentary about Rocco. And now all the while behind the scenes, I'm like, I love Rocco. I think he's amazing, but aren't all parents like me? Don't all parents like empower their children? Don't all parents like get their kid in the water and teach them how to do things and teach them how to be confident? And I didn't have a reference point. And there's a surf therapy event that happens every September in Montauk. And Kevin, the film producer, said, you know, Sarah, I really want you guys to come to this surf therapy event. It's very important. And I said, thank you, Kevin, but I know the spots are limited. Rocco surfs with us every day, every weekend. I want someone else who never gets to surf to take that spot. And he's like, hello, that's not why I want you to come. I want you to come so that other parents can see that you're happy and that your kid is happy and that you're thriving and that you're having fun together and that life is not this heavy, stressful thing, and you can be confident and you can, as a parent, have your own life and that they can do this too. And it wasn't until then that I thought, oh, maybe I am doing something right. Maybe I am figuring this out. And I attribute it to my practice, giving me the strength to show up every day in my life and handle the things that need to be handled. And then shortly thereafter, I was planning to write a book. I sat down to outline it, and I thought it was going to be like the how-to business manual for yoga teachers. And what came out was a spiritual book for special needs parents.
Amazing.
Oh, that's interesting. It will be published this summer. It will be published this summer. And,
what's it called? Do you have the title?
I'm not nailed on the title yet.
Okay.
I'm still, but I will let you know as soon as it comes out. And I'm at the stage where I'm talking with the book designers and doing that whole thing.
Yeah, it takes some time.
But it wasn't until that book came out that I thought, maybe this is really my dharma, and I love yoga and it will always be something that's very important to my life, but maybe I'll just do a little less of that and I'll test this out a little bit. Maybe I do have something to share with these families. And
Fantastic.
I had a lot to share. And the more I'm in these communities, the more I realize, like, oh, wait, this is really special what I've done with my child.
Yeah.
I just assumed everyone was doing that. And I realized it's not the case at all. And so I feel really honored to support families and get them out of survival mode, because they're living in that space all the time, and help them find a place where they can have a lot more joy in their lives. And I think that's it sounds so simple to say it, but now that we just got the final edit of Rocco's documentary, that's going to film festivals soon. As my book's getting ready to come out, I'm just like, oh, now I get it. Now I get why this had to happen to me. Now I get why I had the unique child. This is all making sense now. My dharma, it all makes sense. And so we watched the final edit of the documentary the other day, just got it on Monday, Sunday or Monday. It's perfect. We cried, and Ben's like, remember those nights you used to lay in bed and be like, but why is this happening? I said, yeah, I do. I remember them. And when it felt really intense and really traumatic for me, those moments where I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of bed tomorrow. You guys will relate to this because you've chanted the Yoga Sutra, but I have a beautiful teacher here who I chant the Yoga Sutra with. And I remember I would start hearing the sutra chanting in my head. And I remember telling her that. And she said, you know, I'm so glad that you said that, but that's what it's for. You ever think of the phrase that an idle mind is the devil's workshop? Instead of letting your mind go to all the bad places, give it something beautiful or grounding or centering to think about. And I remember like laying in bed and thinking like, oh, I'll be okay now. And I remember getting up the next morning thinking like, oh, I can't do this. And remembering that my practice buddies were at the shala waiting for me. So I was like, oh, fine. I just threw the covers off and like, you know, got in the shower and drove there like a zombie, would do my practice just out of years of conditioning. That's all it was. And then I would finish and I would feel like, okay, I can do this. And it was like one day at a time, one practice at a time, one step at a time that really allowed me to get out of that survival mode place and now feel like, oh yeah, of course it had to be this way. It all makes sense.
It's just so powerful. Like, yeah, you've such a, I mean, what you're offering to the world and to families and to women who don't have that kind of practice.
Would you get a grip, please? Get a fucking grip, Harmony.
No, it's so
be a fucking
emotional.
professional. This is a professional show.
It's so powerful. It's so important. It's just like, it's so important, you know, and it's so beautiful to have this full circle for you where nothing makes sense. And you're just like, why the fuck me? Like, what did I do wrong? But really, you just did everything right, you know, and you just really.
Oh, fuck, no, I'm getting
I know. You really like were able to bring this light and to share this light. And you're in a place now to help other people find a practice, to find the strength, to find that peace. And it's just it's so moving. It really is.
Thank you. You know, there are times where parents will come to me and say, hey, I have this meeting coming up. Can you show me how to advocate so that my kid gets what he needs? And then there are other times where parents come into my inbox and they're like, I need to know how to take care of myself. I have so much stress in my life, and all are welcome.
Yeah.
We can look at all the things, but I think that any parent, no matter the type of child that you have, it's important to remember that your child is only going to thrive as much as you thrive. You can feed them all the right food and not let them watch too much TV, but if they're feeling your stress all the time, they're absorbing that. Kids are really very, very perceptive. Even if you're not telling them that you're stressed out, they're going to know. And so I think to anyone listening, those emotions that are reverberating off of you into your house, into every person and dog and cat that lives there, like those are real, and it's worth taking the time and the energy to manage yourself, because whether you realize it or not, it's also going to manage everyone else in your house.
Yeah. It's true. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation did a large scale study on teachers. And it's demonstrable that when teachers are suffering high levels of daily stress, that the marks of the children, even within the same school, are worse than the other teachers. So if you can manage stress, just by remembering to take a deep breath once in a while, it will have a remarkably impactful effect on your children.
I think it points to the fact too, and I was thinking about this with your son earlier when you're, saying that he has this label of nonverbal, but like so much, I forget the percentage, but there's studies out there, someone can Google it, I'm sure. Like I'm just going to throw out a number, like 90% of communication is actually nonverbal communication, right? And so everything you're saying, like the vibration we're giving off, the nonverbal cues in our face, in our body posture, in our breath, in, all of those things are communicating to everyone around us all the time. And, your son understands. He knows exactly what's going on. And if you're tuned in like you are to him, of course, you know what's going on with him, because like 90% of it is nonverbal actually at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
But in order to tune in, right? I love that I'm using tune in now because of the Intonato, but in order to tune in to picking up all of those cues and all of the nonverbal communication that is actually telling you everything you need to know, you also 100%. Have to be in a space where you're like able to calmly reside to pick it up, right?
You have to fill the well. You can't just empty the well every day. You have to fill it up.
Yeah. It's sort of a domino effect of first you have to be fully present with yourself so that you can be fully present with those around you, especially a unique child. Children will call you out if you're not present with them. They're saying, "Mom, get off your phone," or whatever. They'll let you know. They're good teachers. They don't tolerate any crap.
No.
And then after you are present with yourself and then with the people around you, especially with your children, you can start to really build a relationship with a unique child from that state of presence. Only when you have that can you really be a confident advocate for your child. I meet so many parents who go into meetings and feel like they just settle for whatever the experts in the meeting are saying they should do for their kid, even if their gut tells them no. Because at home, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of stress. They're not connecting with their child. And they feel like, how can I tell school what to do? I don't even feel good about what's happening in my living room, and I don't know what to do about it. And so they just kind of brush along, even when they know it's not right. They don't know, they don't have the confidence. And so it's like you said, it's scale it all the way back. Start with just being present with yourself and then take that presence as far as it can take you.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I wanted to mention, I don't know if you've did you ever read Martha Beck's book, Expecting Adam?
No.
You should read it. I'm pretty sure that's her book.
After this podcast today.
Yeah. We're the book recommenders. I'm pretty sure it's Expecting Adam. It was written in 1999 and it was her own journey. She has a son with Down syndrome and they did testing early and, she was advised to abort because, he had Down syndrome. And anyway, it's her own journey, but she ended up asking the doctor, will he be able to experience joy? The doctor's like, yeah, of course he will. And she's like, that's it. Like,
we're good.
Yeah, we're good.
We're good. I have a neighbor here in Montauk who has Engelmann syndrome. She's 20. And so that's a disorder that has more uniform delays, unlike autism being a really wide spectrum. Engelmann syndrome is more specific, and verbal challenges are high on the list of challenges that these people have. And I was speaking with my neighbor's dad about it, and we were just talking one day as parents, and I noticed that my neighbor was the most joyful young woman.
Yeah.
Joyful. happy, smile. And so I was looking up Engelmann syndrome because I thought I should really educate myself in case I have people come to me with concerns about their child who has this syndrome. So I was educating myself about it. And one of the common characteristics of people with Engelmann syndrome is that they're unusually prone to happiness.
Well, what kind of disorder is that?
That's beautiful.
Right?
It's not a fucking disorder.
I thought, what a gift, and what a gift. And, you know, it really made me think, like, who's to say that the normal functioning person over here who's miserable every day is a better member of society than someone who might look and act differently and communicate differently, but brings more of a joyful vibration into the world.
Yeah.
I would hire that person.
Yeah, exactly.
In my business.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm gonna read that. Thank you. That's fascinating.
Yeah, well, I think you'll really enjoy it. She's an amazing author. She has so many incredible books, but I thought that one might speak to you specifically.
Well, I really want to thank you for sharing.
Yeah, tell us, and all of the listeners or viewers,
your website,
how they can reach out to you, because I know so many women, families these days. It seems like there's more I don't know if it's just more awareness around neurodivergency, or
well, 1 in 6 kids is diagnosed with something these days.
Yeah, that's so like more beings coming into the world with it. So yeah.
The best way to find me now, my website is under construction as we speak and will be done very soon. Okay. I will give you guys a free guide for parents that you can pop the link into the show notes.
Beautiful.
Of how to advocate for your child amidst a pandemic, because we've seen with the pandemic a lot of regression. Kids have not been getting what they need a lot of time, and parents don't know how to make up the challenges that they've been facing and improve their child's situation. So that's a great read, even if you don't have a neurodiverse kid, because at some point you're going to have a conversation with someone, a doctor, a family member, where you need to advocate for your kid. So I'll give you that link, and people can have it in their inbox, and that's the best way. Otherwise, follow me on Instagram, Sara Intonato, and I'll give you the link too for that, for your show notes. And I share all my podcast episodes there. I share different things that I'm working on there. I'll share the Rocco documentary when it comes out really soon on there. And
that's
and your book too.
And my book, for sure. So lots of things happening, and I really was committed to getting the book finished, because I know it's a resource that you could go to your library and get, right? So no matter where you are in your life, I wanted people to have a way to start. And so that's really my motivation with the book. And certainly I hope that people receive from it in whatever way helps them the most in their life.
Oh, I'm sure it's got so much good guidance. And like you say, I think these days we could all use a coach, someone who's helpfully supportive to help us advocate for ourselves or for our loved ones. Even if your child isn't neurodivergent, sometimes you have to be a strong advocate for them. I remember Jedi was even having like some stomach issues and like not digesting things proper. I had to like yell at the doctor, basically. She's like, nothing's wrong with him. I'm like, there's something wrong with him.
Right?
It's really difficult.
Nobody knows. No one knows your child better than you. This is what I keep telling parents. Stop giving your power away to all these experts who see your kid for an hour a day. No one knows your child better than you. So what needs to happen so that you can feel confident and really standing in your power, like you did, saying there is something not right with my child and we have to figure it out. I don't care what you say. That's how I want all parents to feel, like they can do that in any setting that they need to.
Yeah, totally. That's so beautiful. Well, thank you so much. It was just such a joy and a pleasure to speak with you.
Pleasure was mine. Thank you for having me.